The stagecoach deposited her in a cloud of red dust and curses. Elias Thorne watched from the porch of his low-slung ranch house, the wood warm and familiar under his calloused palms. The land stretched out around him, a vast, breathing entity of tawny grass and stubborn cedar, under a sky so immense it could make a man feel insignificant or like its sole proprietor. For Elias, it had long been the former. Her name was Anya Petrova. He knew this from the few letters exchanged, translated by a service in Cheyenne. Her words had been simple, hopeful. She spoke of a hard life in a smoky European city, of a desire for open spaces and honest work. Elias's own letters were equally plain. He described the ranch, the cattle, the silence. He did not write of the loneliness that gnawed at him, a hollow space not even the howl of a coyote could fill. He was a man of 40, his face leathered by sun and wind, his heart grown as tough and lonely as the land he tended. When the coach rattled away, she was left standing there, a single, dark figure against the bleached backdrop of the prairie. Even from a distance, he could see she was slight. As he walked toward her, the details resolved, and his step faltered. It wasn't just the weariness in her posture, or the cheap, ill-fitting dress she wore. It was the marks. One eye was swollen nearly shut, a palette of livid purple and angry yellow. A dark, scabbed cut split her lower lip. As she lifted a hand to push a strand of lank, brown hair from her face, he saw the mottled, blue-black bruises circling her wrist like a vile bracelet. She stood perfectly still, her one good eye fixed on him, holding a small, frayed carpet bag as if it were a shield. Elias stopped a few feet from her. The words he had practiced, a simple, welcome, or, I'm Elias, died in his throat. The sheer, brutal evidence of her journey struck him dumb. He looked at her, this broken bird deposited on his doorstep, and a slow, cold anger began to simmer in his gut, an emotion he hadn't felt in years. He thought of the coach drivers, the other passengers, the men in the towns she must have passed through. What kind of animals had done this? What kind of world allowed it? He saw the fear in her good eye, a wild, trapped animal look. She was waiting for his reaction, for the blow, the curse, the disgust. He knew that look. He'd seen it in a calf separated from its mother, in a cornered fox. Elias Thorne was a man of few words. He had learned that most things worth saying could be said without them. He did not ask, what happened? He did not exclaim, my God. He simply took off his wide-brimmed hat, a gesture of old-fashioned respect his father had taught him, and met her gaze. His voice, when it finally came, was low and rough as river stone. Would you care for a cup of coffee? He asked. The journey must have been long. Her one good eye widened in surprise. The tension in her shoulders eased, just a fraction. She gave a single, sharp nod. He did not offer to take her bag. He did not move to touch her. He simply turned and led the way to the house, his steps slow so she could follow without hurry. The house was Spartan but clean. A cast iron stove dominated one wall, a sturdy table and 2 chairs stood in the center, and a worn rag rug lay before the hearth. It was a man's place, devoid of frippery, but it was solid and honest. He poured coffee from a pot that was always on the stove into a heavy ceramic mug and set it on the table for her. He poured one for himself and sat opposite her, leaving the expanse of the table between them. For a long while, they sat in silence, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner and the mournful cry of the wind outside. She held the mug with both hands, as if absorbing its warmth. She did not look at him, but stared into the dark liquid as if it were a scrying pool. The men, on the ship, she whispered finally, her voice raspy, her accent thick as tar. Then, the man in New York. He was to bring me to the train. He said there was a price for his help. A different price. Elias's knuckles were white where he gripped his mug. He took a slow sip of the bitter brew. He didn't need the details. The story was written plainly on her face. A woman alone, with no protection, crossing an ocean and a continent to meet a stranger. She had been prey from the moment she set sail. I am sorry, she said, still not looking up. I am not, as presented. I am damaged. Elias set his mug down with a firm click. The ranch is 500 acres, he said, his voice steady. I run a herd of about 200 head. It's hard work. The house needs a woman's touch. She finally lifted her gaze to his, confusion warring with the fear. I have a spare room, he continued. You'll stay there. For now. We'll have no talk of other arrangements. Not until you're healed. Not until you're ready. Tears welled in her good eye, but she blinked them back fiercely. She gave another sharp nod. And so, a new routine began on the Thorne ranch. Anya kept to her small, whitewashed room for the first few days, only emerging for meals. Elias would leave a plate of eggs and bacon for her in the morning before heading out to mend fences. He'd return at midday to find the plate washed and put away, the house tidied, and a fresh pot of coffee on the stove. At supper, they ate together in a silence that was, by degrees, becoming less strained. He learned a few things about her through observation, as a tracker reads a trail. She was terrified of sudden movements. If he stood up from the table too quickly, she would flinch. She worked with a quiet, desperate efficiency, as if her worth was measured only by her utility. The bruises on her face began to fade from purple to green to a faint yellow, but the ones on her spirit were slower to heal. One evening, a week after her arrival, he came in from the range to find her staring at his bookshelf. It was a small collection, mostly on animal husbandry and weather patterns, with a few well-worn volumes of history and a complete Shakespeare, a relic from his mother. You read? He asked, shrugging off his coat. She nodded, her hand hovering near the spine of the Tempest. My father was a teacher. He taught me some English. And to read. Take any you like, Elias said. They don't get much use from me. That was the first crack in the dam. The books became a bridge. She would sometimes read aloud in the evenings, her voice gaining strength as she navigated the complex language of Shakespeare or the dry prose of a cattle management guide. Elias would sit in his chair by the fire, mending a harness or cleaning his rifle, listening. He didn't always understand the words, but he understood the sound of a voice other than his own in the house, and it was a sound he found he had been starving for. He, in turn, began to teach her about the ranch. He showed her how to feed the chickens, how to milk the stubborn nanny goat, where the best berries grew along the creek. He never instructed, only demonstrated. He was patient, his movements slow and deliberate. He gave her tasks, not orders. A purpose. One afternoon, he found her in the corral, talking softly to his old sorrel mare, Belle. She was stroking the horse's nose, her movements gentle and sure. Elias leaned on the fence, watching. He saw the way the horse, a normally skittish creature, leaned into her touch. She likes you, Elias said. Anya turned, and for the first time, he saw a genuine, unguarded smile. Touch her lips. It transformed her face, lighting it from within. She is gentle. Would you like to learn to ride? He asked. The fear flickered back into her eyes for a moment, then was replaced by a glimmer of something else. Curiosity, a spark of courage. Yes, she said. I would. The lessons were slow. He taught her how to saddle and bridle the horse, his hands never touching hers, his voice a calm, steady murmur. When she first mounted Belle, her body was rigid with terror. Elias held the lead rope, walking slowly beside them. Breathe, Anya, he said, his voice low. She can feel your fear. You must breathe deep and let it go. The land won't hurt you. The horse won't hurt you. It was the most he had said to her at one time. She looked down at him, at his sun-weathered face and calm, gray eyes, and she took a deep, shuddering breath. She let it out slowly, and as she did, her grip on the reins loosened. Weeks turned into a month, then two. The last of the bruises vanished. The hollows in her cheeks filled out with good food and clean air. Her body, once frail, grew strong from the work. She learned to ride, not just to sit on a horse, but to become a part of it, to feel the rhythm of the land through its gait. She took over the kitchen, filling the house with the smells of baking bread and stews made with wild herbs she found on her rides. They spoke more now. She told him of the soot-choked city of her childhood, of the factory where she had worked 16 hours a day, of the letter from the mail-order service that had seemed like a ticket to heaven. He told her of his parents, who had built this ranch from nothing, of the fever that took them both in one harsh winter, of the years of solitude that had followed. They were two solitary creatures, orbiting each other in a careful, respectful dance. He never entered her room. He never laid a hand on her, save for once, when he offered his hand to help her down from a high step on the porch. Her fingers were cold and small in his, and she pulled them away as if burned, but she also murmured, "Thank you, Elias." The change came with the first bite of autumn. The air grew sharp, and the aspens on the distant hills flared into gold. Elias had to ride out to the far pasture to check on a sick heifer. He was gone for 2 days. When he returned, weary and saddle sore, he saw the smoke from the chimney and felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. But as he rode closer, he saw that the front door was slightly ajar. A deep, primal dread seized him. He kicked his horse into a gallop, his heart hammering against his ribs. He threw open the door, his hand going to the knife at his belt. The main room was empty. "Anya," he called, his voice rough with fear. She emerged from the kitchen, her face pale, a rolling pin held in her hands like a club. When she saw it was him, the weapon clattered to the floor. "Elias," she breathed. "What happened?" he demanded, striding into the room. The door was open. Her eyes were wide. "A man came," she said, her voice trembling. "Yesterday. A drifter. He was rough. He demanded food. He demanded things." Elias felt a cold fury, colder than the autumn wind, wash over him. "What did you do?" "I gave him food," she said, her chin lifting. "I put it on the porch and told him to take it and go." He laughed. "He said a pretty thing like me shouldn't be alone." He tried to come inside. She pointed to the doorframe, where a fresh, muddy boot print was stamped on the white wood. "I had your rifle," Anya said, her voice gaining strength. "The one you showed me how to load. I did not point it at him. I held it, and I told him that my husband was Elias Thorne, and that he was checking the north fence line and would be back any minute. I told him that if Elias found him here, he would bury him in a hole so deep the coyotes wouldn't find his bones." She took a shaky breath. "He left. But I have kept the door barred since. I only opened it when I heard your horse." Elias stared at her. He saw not the bruised and broken woman who had stumbled from the stagecoach, but a woman of steel and fire. A woman who had defended his home. Their home. In that moment, the careful distance he had maintained, the wall he had built around his heart, crumbled into dust. He did not move. He simply looked at her, standing there in the middle of the room she had made into a home, her hands now empty and clenched at her sides. "Anya," he said, and his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. He took a step toward her, then another, until he was standing before her. He slowly, so slowly she could have stopped him with a glance, reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were warm now, and they trembled slightly in his, but they did not pull away. He looked down at their joined hands, then back into her eyes. All the words he had never known how to say seemed to rise up in him at once. "The man who did this to you," Elias began, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "The men on the ship. The man in New York. I have thought many nights of finding them. Of making them pay for what they did to you." A shadow of the old fear passed over her face. "You would become like them." "No," he said, his grip on her hand firm, but gentle. "That is not my way. This land, it teaches you. It gives life, and it takes life, but it does so with a balance. A man who lives here, his worth is not in the hurt he can give, but in the peace he can keep. In the things he can protect." He took a deep breath, the most important of his life. "Anya, the loneliness I felt before you came, it was a vast and empty thing. This ranch, this land, it was just dirt and sky. He struggled for the words. You have made it a home. You have filled the silence with meaning. He looked at her, his gaze steady and true. The bruises are gone from your face. I see you now, not the marks they left. I see your strength. I see your kindness. I see the woman who reads to Shakespeare to an uneducated rancher and makes him feel like a king. I see the woman who faced down a drifter with my own rifle. He paused, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand, a touch so tender it made her breath catch. The lonely rancher just asked, he said, repeating the fragment of a story that had brought her here, but giving it a new ending. He asked for a wife. But he doesn't want a bride from a catalog. He is asking you, Anya. Will you stay? Not in the spare room. Not as a housekeeper. But as my wife. In every way. Tears finally spilled from Anya's eyes, but they were not tears of pain or fear. They were tears of a healing so profound it could only express itself as water and light. She looked at this quiet, steadfast man who had asked for nothing, who had given her safety, respect, and time. He had not tried to own her, but had offered her a partnership. He had not tried to erase her past, but had given her a future. She did not answer with words. She squeezed his hand, stepped forward, and rested her forehead against his chest. He smelled of leather, horses, and cold, clean air. It was the smell of home. Elias wrapped his arms around her, holding her carefully, as if she were the most precious thing on all his 500 acres. And in the quiet of the ranch house, with the wind singing its old song outside, the last of the loneliness finally blew away, leaving in its place a peace as deep and enduring as the land itself.